Every leader has a strategy. Executing on that strategy is the challenge. If you want to learn how to effectively achieve what you've set out to accomplish, then this show is for you. Gain keen insights and listen in as leaders share their stories and challenges. SOAR Vision Group and the Baldrige Foundation welcome you to Leader Dialogue Radio.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Leader Dialogue, brought to you by SOAR Vision Group and the Baldrige Foundation. I'm Duffy Dixon. Let me introduce you first to Ben Sawyer. He is the CEO of SOAR Vision Group with over 30 years of executive leadership experience, and Lisa Council, who is the Chief Commercial Officer of SOAR. She has 2 decades of clinical leadership and clinical informatics experience. This is considered what we like to call the deep dive. We like to follow up with people that we've had on our show to come back a second week and really delve into some of the things that came up. So the first thing we'll ask is, if you can go on leaderdialogue.com/podcast, you can listen to last week. We delve a little more into our guests, and we've been focusing on the Quest for Performance Excellence Conference and the value of it. And this is something that's coming up in March, and it is a benefit. It can be a benefit for companies of all sizes. That brings me to introduce our guests, Kay Kendall, who is the CEO of BaldrigeCoach, and Josh Reset, Executive Director of Corporate Development from the Baldrige Foundation. Kay comes to us from going to these for a number of years, but she also, she's been on the path with these Baldrige Award winners.
Well, she's a past judge as a master examiner. Yeah, we're really privileged again, Kay, to have both you and Josh back for week 2, talking about the Quest conference and the opportunity there. If you don't mind, we're going to jump right into it as a roundtable conversation. And for the listeners, the deep dive is very intentionally that. We're going to roundtable with these guests regarding their perspective on the Baldrige and the Quest conference and the opportunity for performance excellence. To kick it off, Kay, you mentioned early in last week's show that one of the advantages of the Baldrige, even in an accelerated business environment like the age of consumerism that we're in now, that the alignment of the organization down to the individual is significantly differentiating, because an organization can be much more agile in a high quality, high performance way. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for the listeners in the deep dive?
Sure. One of the things I oftentimes will challenge senior leaders to do is go out into your organization, and perhaps in groups that you don't lead, so it's less intimidating, and ask people, what are the 3 most important things that our organization is focused on this year? And in many organizations, you will get so many different responses that if you were going to ask those folks to turn on a dime, it would take so long because they're not in alignment right now.
Right.
If you go out to organizations that are using and effectively using the Baldrige Excellence Framework, you get much more unanimity of responses. And now think about that. Suppose you had 3 things and everybody knew that's what you were focused on, but suddenly there's a change in your environment, change in the competitive nature of it, and you needed to make a swift change in one of those 3 things and redirect it. How much easier would that be?
Yeah, that's a great point.
It is, and it's so practical.
Yeah.
That's what makes it so great, is practical. Every organization could try it, test it.
Yeah, it reminds me, actually, we had Dr. Morton Hansen on our show. Okay, I don't know if you've read his latest book, Great at Work. He was a co-author with Jim Collins of Great by Choice. His first principle in his book, Great at Work, is you have to do less and then obsess, which is this exact concept that you talked about of the organization has to focus and then apply dedicated effort to make sure that they can accomplish that. And the Baldrige, to your point, helps organizations move in that direction, correct?
Yes, and to piggyback on that, the other thing that Baldrige helps you do is truly empower your workforce. Because if people know what's most important, they know your values, they make decisions all the time. Even if you're a micromanager, you can't micromanage people enough to be able to direct their every move. So now with their discretionary thought, they know what's most important.
That's right. So Jennifer, let's talk a little bit about that, which is effective leadership within the context of the Baldrige, but just in general, as Kay just alluded to, there's no way to get success with micromanagement. Can you talk about that a little bit? I know you just recently wrote a white paper that addresses some of those things.
I mean, there's so many different directions we could go with this right now, but I'll start with saying if you look at organizations that have pursued Baldrige and received Baldrige, you'll find that we talked last week about the categories, and there are the 7 categories, and you could argue obviously every single one of those are critical to organizations, but there are certain ones that tend to have a higher correlation with high-performing organizations, and some of those include leadership, as well as workforce, and as well as measurement, analysis, and knowledge management. So categories 1, 5, and 4, respectively. And so when you think about leadership, it really sets the foundation for everything that happens in an organization. It could either be a catalyst for change and for improvement and driving results, or it can be a counteragent where it's actually directly hindering it. If it's not founded based on empowerment and alignment to the organization, to where people understand, hey, what does this mean to me when the organization is pursuing these 2 strategic objectives or 3 strategic objectives?
Right, and we've talked again in previous shows how enlightened leaders understand the difference between authority, which is inherent in their position, and responsibility, which is what they share with the front line. And really, actions are largely experiments, right, that are back and forth dialogue between senior leadership decision-making and frontline action. And again, experienced leaders understand that they don't own both authority and responsibility. They share responsibility. Another theme that came up last week, Kay, that I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about, you elucidated the 12 values that are inherent in the Baldrige framework, and you also had talked about the 7 categories. Can you talk a little bit about the intersection of those 2 and the significance of that?
Well, the core values and concepts are not a separate element of criteria. They are, if you think about it like a loom, they are woven through the categories. So, for instance, a systems perspective, well, that describes the whole framework itself. Customer-focused excellence will show up in leadership, Category 1. It will show up again in strategy, Category 2. It will show up certainly in 3, customers. It's also going to show up in 4 in terms of your measurement system. Do you have measures that are reflective of what matters to your customers?
Right.
It will show up again in Category 5. So what do you do in terms of instilling a customer focus, customer service standards with your workforce? And Category 6 is how do you design your key work processes so that they meet customer requirements and expectations? So it's woven throughout, and then of course it shows up again in Category 7 when we look at customer-focused results.
Yeah, I like that metaphor and reference of it's interwoven together. That's great.
So Kay and Josh, if I'm a leader and I want my organization to improve and I don't want to be in the same place I am today, 5 years from now, what's something I can do right now to get my leadership engaged and involved and educated about the Baldrige framework?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think Kay had even touched upon this in our time before. But one of the things you can do is go to nist.gov, /Baldrige, and on there are a variety of free tools and resources. Specifically, if you look underneath the self-assessing tab on the website, you can find different improvement tools, tools that will help you talk about different topics such as, are you a role model leader, or are we making progress? Different things to really help you get started along the way. And the great thing is these are all free.
The other resource that I would point to, in addition to the upcoming Quest for Excellence, is the Alliance for Performance Excellence is a collaborative of the state and regional-based Baldrige programs. And many times they are very welcoming of people who are just in an exploratory phase. So I would encourage you to reach out to your state and regional programs. In fact, many of them have conferences. I'm speaking at one in Tennessee next week. And their conferences can be a little, I don't want to say intimidating, but a little more approachable in terms of if you're trying to bring a bunch of senior leaders, it may be a little bit easier for you to persuade them to go to an event that's not as much travel expense as perhaps going to the D.C. area, and perhaps they can even drive to. And they might be able to network with other local leaders
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you, Kay, for bringing that up. So another topic that we talked about last week that I wanted to ask your help with, Kay, is for those organizations that just want to understand the process itself and the scoring guidelines and dimensions. In other words, so let's say they want to do a Baldrige, they want to embark on this journey, and they want to do it to be Baldrige worthy, not just to achieve the award. That was an important point last week. But they just don't understand the process or how it's scored or what the dimensions are. Can you talk a little bit about that and provide some clarity?
I can, and let me talk first about the application process. So in order to apply for Baldrige, you have to meet certain criteria. One of those would be receiving the top-level award at one of these alliance programs. So that's one way. You can also, there are other eligibility ways that you can apply. I would encourage you again, though, to take your first step towards working with some of these alliance programs. Many of them have a tiered application process. And by that I mean the full Baldrige application or their top-level award is a 55-page application. Many of the ones that have a tiered process start out first with just doing the organizational profile. That's 5 pages. That's just a description of who you are. You don't have to learn any Baldrige language to be able to write your organizational profile. The next tier might include perhaps 15 pages at a basic question level. The next tier might be 30 pages at the overall question level. And then the final product would be that 55-page application that is at all of the multiple questions in the criteria. Then in every program that I'm familiar with, the applications are then distributed to trained examiners who sign a conflict of interest statement declaring they have no significant knowledge of this applicant and no conflicts with it. They conduct what's called an independent review. And that means they review your application and they write a feedback report sitting all by themselves at night and on the weekends because they're all volunteers. And then they have either an in-person consensus meeting or in Baldrige, its consensus is all done by phone. Then what happens is they consent on the comments, they consent on the scores, and that feedback report then goes to a panel of judges. The judges at that point, at least for the Baldrige program, don't know the identity of the applicants. They know only the scoring profiles and what sector they're in. And they make a determination, starting with the lowest scoring applicant, until they reach a point where they think this organization is probably mature enough that they deserve a site visit. And the purpose of a site visit is to really verify and clarify what's in the application. So anytime that you have an opportunity to submit an application where you're guaranteed of a site visit, which many of the alliance programs will do, you're in a much better place because the feedback is more actionable. Without a site visit, the examiners may write comments that really are more reflective of, I'm sorry to say this, how poorly you wrote your application,
right.
But your organization could be much better than that. Following a site visit, the teams again revise their consensus scorebook. They may even rescore some of the items. Then all of that documentation go to the judges, and the judges at this point know your organization's identity. They will have reviewed your application. They will review the site visit report, the site visit issue worksheets, and then the judges will make a final decision as to the award. In the tiered programs, it may be an award level. There may be not just a top-level award, but some levels below that you might still receive recognition. I hope that helped.
That's very helpful. Absolutely. No, that was excellent. So, Jennifer, I wanted to ask you a question relative to the Baldrige journeys. The Baldrige is non-prescriptive, which is wonderful because it is universally applied and applicable to any organization wherever they're at. There also, though, are some acceleration tools and things that organizations can use to help support the process that they're going through individually. Can you just talk a little bit about those?
Sure. So I completely agree around, obviously one of the things that people typically mention is that Baldrige is non-prescriptive, as you said. The value of that is that it gives you, a framework. It gives you principles that you can apply, but without telling you a cookie-cutter approach of what has to be done. So a few tools come to mind. One is actually on the Baldrige website. They actually share all of the recipient applications, and that is just a wealth of knowledge where you can go in, see their processes, see how they wrote up portions of their application, see the tools that they shared. So that's available, obviously, to anyone. And then there's other things, as you know, SOAR actually offers a ton of valuable tools, if I can put in a self-plug for us, such as our Pulse technology, which is Purpose-Led Strategy Execution System. And what that allows you to do is to actually take your processes and your strategy and cascade it down to every level of the organization and align it with the actions that are going on, which ties to your whatever your performance excellence system is, as well as the actual data and metrics that are telling you how well you're doing. So it really supports the premise of, focus on what you need to focus on, act to make sure you're achieving that focus, and then get feedback so you can recalibrate. I will say, just like any organization that implements a technology, it's not an end-all, be-all tool. It's going to save the day. It has to be embedded around processes. It has to be incorporated into the daily bread, the day-to-day of what you're doing, as opposed to just kind of a tool on the side that you have. It's got to actually be used. And when it is used, just like all the other resources that are available, it allows organizations to truly drive value at an accelerated rate, because we have technology today, so we should take advantage of it. There's trouble we often have with technology today is we have too much of it, and they're all in separate systems. So if you can bring that together, it brings a lot of value, so that everyone is on the same page.
Awesome. That's really helpful. So Kay, you talked last week about an award-worthy journey versus an award-seeking journey. Can you talk a little bit more about that? That was really an interesting insight.
We actually call it the Baldrige Award paradox, is that when we're approached by clients that tell us we want to win the Baldrige Award, we can pretty much say that they're not, because they're focused on the wrong thing. It's a shiny object syndrome. They will lose heart and lose focus. Those that really understand that this is about creating and perpetuating and sustaining excellence, they will get there. And I'd like to just share one story. Worked with Kindred, it was then Kindred, Mountain Valley out in Kellogg, Idaho, and worked with their senior leader, their administrator. They're a 68-bed skilled nursing facility. Their center was built in 1970. It's a single-story building. They have no private rooms, no spa-like amenities. And when I got out there in 2011, I was absolutely blown away by them. They went on to win the long-term care industry's Baldrige-based highest level award, the Gold Award. Their executive director, Mary Ruth Butler, and their senior leaders were so focused on this journey, and I stayed in touch with them, and I kept saying, you all have no idea how exceptional you are. We finally convinced them to apply to Baldrige in 2016. They are, to date, the only skilled nursing facility in the country to have won the Baldrige Award.
That's amazing.
Now, why would a 68-bed skilled nursing facility be able to compete on that stage with large organizations? Because the leaders were passionate about improvement. In fact, when they won the Baldrige Award, if you go out and look at their recipient profile, for the 3 years prior to that, they had 100% resident and family satisfaction for 3 years.
I've never even heard of that.
Oh my gosh, that's unheard of. Yeah,
that's
sure.
amazing.
They have less than half of the state average of turnover in staff, despite the fact that they have people drive to their facility past hospitals that pay $15 an hour more.
I'm hoping more skilled nursing facilities are going to follow their suit.
Yeah, can we please?
We are encouraging several.
Can we?
We are.
Please just try to replicate that.
I know, here in Georgia, please.
So to me, that's the whole notion of award-worthy versus pursuit of the award, because they weren't even planning on applying for Baldrige, but yet that was their trajectory as they kept trying to get higher and higher levels of performance.
Yeah, that's a great story, Kay. And by the way, for the listeners, Kay is the author of a book called Leading the Malcolm Baldrige Way, How World-Class Leaders Align Their Organizations to Achieve Exceptional Results, which the example you just gave kind of showcases the title of that book. Any other insight regarding the book that you want to share with the listening audience?
Just one that actually was pretty surprising to us, but then upon reflection, not so much. We interviewed more than 50 leaders from more than 30 organizations that had either won the Baldrige Award or a Baldrige-based award. And we had a standard set of questions. We did all of these except one by phone interviews. And as I was going across all of my transcripts, because I would type their responses verbatim as we talked, I realized that we did not have a question about culture. And every single leader we talked to brought up the importance of organizational culture.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
Yeah.
And what did they say why that was so important?
For some of the reasons that we talked about earlier about knowing what's most important, they talked about having the vision and values be real, having them not just be the laminated values, having them be part of how senior leaders make decisions, your recruitment and your hiring practices, that people need to understand what's an acceptable culture and what's not acceptable. And several of the leaders talked about if they were brought into an organization, what intentional changes they had to make to get the culture they desired.
Right. Jennifer, this reminds me of the conversation that you and I were having this week regarding the impact of leadership, empowerment, and behaviors on culture. I'm putting you on the spot, but can you talk a little bit to the listening audience about that conversation as it relates to what Kay was just talking about?
Sure. And I think if anything is as clear as how significant culture is, it's around the story of what she just told around, 100% patient and client satisfaction, the turnover being half of others. I mean, that doesn't happen by things like bribery for, when you're paying less than the competitor or a similar situation down the road. I mean, that happens because people want to stay and there's a genuine desire to be there. And, there's so many things that tend to stem from there, but, leadership and culture are typically driven through the environment. You can walk in and feel a culture. I mean, you guys, I'm sure if you've been to organizations or places of business, you walk in and almost right away what type of a feel you get from that place of business. Whether it's a hospital, a retail store, a restaurant, a school, you can tell. You can see what it is that they have. That's kind of the untold story, what's in the walls, so to speak. And that is often driven by a combination of the strategy that you've decided on. Is that strategy aligned with your talent that you've got in place? Is it aligned with the skills that your organization brings to the market? Does it make sense? Does it fill a need? Is it something that ultimately inspires people through purpose of what they're doing and passion? That's something that comes from Morton Hansen's book. He talks about, P squared in his books. And then the other side of that is then do your operations support it? Because you can tell people you've got a great mission all day long, but if you don't engage the organization by enabling them with processes that work and helping them empower them in an organization, engaging them in performance improvement and innovative solutions, then it's just words, right? So there's got to be actions that say, hey, if you're encountering a problem, we want our team to fix it. We want to know about it so we can address it. And there's got to be elements of the organization structurally that support that. A really good example, Ben, if you recall, we were working with a hospital, and one of the objectives for the case managers inside of the emergency department was to assess, is this patient, is there medical necessity for this patient to be admitted?
Right.
Because if we can have that patient treated in an outpatient setting, that's better for the patient. It's less expensive. It's less likely to have any kind of infection or issues, right? But on the flip side, that organization had them incentivized in a way that was completely different. It was just around how many patients they can go talk to without being actual meaningful touch points around that encounter, right? So are we identifying the right patients to talk to as opposed to just the volume of patients we talk to? And that's an example of where incentives may not be aligned with what you're actually saying to your employees, with what you're encouraging them to do. So there's that balance. And the reason I say that is because there's this foundation of leadership that has to engage and empower your employees. That helps create the culture. But there's also behaviors that can drive and enhance that culture as well.
That's a great answer. Thank you. And for being put on the spot, that was impressive. Kay, we're again wrapping the end of our deep dive. some sort of last thoughts based on this conversation, or things that may have not come up that you want to make sure listeners are walking away with?
Thinking back to somebody I worked for years ago, and he had a saying, and it was when people would be pushing back on some effort he was trying to champion. And he always asked the question, if not this, what? Mm-hmm. If not now, when?
Right.
And I thought that was just such a great way to get people to really drop their guards and think about, seriously, is our world going to be any less complex 5 years from now? Will our competition be any less fierce? Will the demand for talented, engaged employees be less? So if not this, then what? And if not this, then when?
Right. That's a great way to wrap up this session, Duffy.
And well, before we do that, so again, for those of you who want to get more involved and want to learn more about Quest, we'd like for you guys to go and register. Again, those dates are March 24th through the 27th. Duffy, I'll turn it over to you if you want to give some additional details.
I do. So those of you who are listening, we said it pretty fast. It's NIST.gov. And for those of you who don't know the word NIST, which I'm looking at both of you at the table, like you saw my face, or I was like, oh, what? It's NIST. It stands for National Institute of Standards and Technology. So NIST.gov/Baldrige. And again, that's BALDRIGE. And it sounds like just alone what she said. If you can look at what candidates filled out, you can actually see what they filled out trying to, get this, be worthy of this award. That in and of itself, there's a lot on there to just get people started and thinking about it. And as you said, before you even get on the Baldrige journey, you can go to one of these Quest events and see what it's all about, and you have access to all of these award winners.
That's right.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so join us in DC and come on down.
That's right.
Come on up.
Ben's the large guy with red hair, just saying. And he's
I'll be
lots
there.
of fun. Yeah. Thank you so much, Kay, for joining us. We really appreciate it with all of your experience. We really appreciate it. And also Josh Reset, we appreciate you too, the Baldrige Foundation. Thank you so much for everyone who's been listening. Again, if you didn't hear last week, please join in, because a lot of great things and a lot of good reasons to look into the Baldrige Foundation. I want to thank everyone on behalf of Ben and Lisa and myself, also our producer.
And Jennifer.
Oh, and Jennifer. We keep forgetting about Jennifer.
Yeah,
'cause
I don't
she's
know what's
the
going
phone.
on
I
there.
know.
I know.
You're not forgettable.
Out of sight, out of mind.
That's right. We really appreciate everyone listening. And on behalf of our producer, Mike, as well, I'm Duffy Dixon. Join us next time on Leader Dialogue here on Business RadioX.